Let's begin with a structural overview. Pan Am Flight 103, the Lockerbie bombing, another lecture. Hello, I'm Professor Alexei, your guide today.
Hi, I'm Priyanka, assisting Professor Alexei.
To frame our discussion, it's important to understand first, in plain terms, what Pan Am Flight 103 was. It was a regularly scheduled transatlantic service running Frankfurt to Detroit, with stops in London and New York. Passengers could book the whole itinerary on one ticket. They and their luggage moved from a feeder leg into a Boeing 747 at Heathrow for the Atlantic crossing. In December 1988, that 747 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people, 259 on board and 11 on the ground. This was and remains the deadliest terrorist attack in United Kingdom history.
So, in simpler terms, a lot of moving parts across airports, and then a bomb destroyed the aircraft mid-flight over land. That's the core event and why it mattered globally.
Now, in more technical language, the aircraft type was a Boeing 747-121, tail number N739PA, named Clipper Made of the Seas. Notably, it was the 15th 747 ever built. The 747 platform, if you will, was the backbone of long-haul civil aviation in that era. We observed that the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, the AAIB, concluded the bomb detonated in the forward cargo hold, producing rapid decompression. That is to say, a sudden internal pressure drop that tears structure, severs control cables, and yields catastrophic breakup within seconds. Interline luggage refers to bags transferred across flights or carriers within a single itinerary. Those flows, spanning Frankfurt to Heathrow and then onward, became central to reconstructing how one particular suitcase reached the 747.
And, just to be clear, AAIB is the UK body that reconstructs accidents. And rapid decompression explains why there was no distress call. It was too fast for human reaction.
Moving forward, why does this case matter beyond its tragedy? Clearly, it reshaped aviation security. Positive passenger bag match policies and scrutiny of interline baggage chains tightened. Internationally, it triggered years of UN sanctions and diplomatic bargaining with Libya, tied to responsibility and compensation. It is worth noting the climate of confusion in the immediate aftermath. Multiple groups claimed responsibility, and a contemporaneous CIA analysis found one claim more credible than others, but assigned none definitively. Simultaneously, we learned that an FAA security bulletin from early December 1988, warning of a Pan Am Frankfurt to U.S. threat, did not translate into effective station action. A sobering lesson in how information flow can fail, precisely when it is most needed. Next, let's explore a few basics and the timeline. The airframe, first flown in January 1970 and delivered the following month, later renamed Clipper Made of the Seas, departed its Heathrow stand at 1804 and took off at 1825, entirely on schedule despite popular myths. At 1858 near Prestwick, Captain James B. Macquarie checked in with Shanwick. "Good evening, Scottish, Clipper 103. We are level at 310. At 19:02:44, Scottish ATC issued the oceanic clearance. There was no reply. At 19:02:50, the cockpit voice recorder captured a brief, distinctive 180 millisecond hiss. Then the aircraft began to break apart. The nose separated within roughly 3 seconds. Major sections descended on Lockerbie, with the main wing box striking Sherwood Crescent and causing a vast fuel-fed fireball."
I think what also stands out is the scale after. Investigators recovered millions of fragments, reconstructed the fuselage, and linked pieces of a Samsonite suitcase and a Toshiba radio cassette player, plus clothing later traced to Malta. The fact that debris fell on land rather than into the Atlantic preserved evidence that would otherwise have been lost.
Indeed, we can infer that geography shaped justice. And to complete a humane note on the basic record, among the 270 dead were 190 American citizens and 43 British citizens. 35 were Syracuse University students returning from study abroad. A pathologist later concluded that at least 2 passengers might have survived had immediate care been possible. Yet, given the dispersion and fires, such intervention was tragically beyond reach. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal remark. My academic interest lies in how technical failures and intentional acts intersect with legal architecture. Lockerbie forced states to innovate. A Scottish court sitting in the Netherlands at Camp Zeist. UN sanctions shaping leverage. Compensation frameworks negotiating between law and diplomacy. As it were, it is a canonical case in how forensic minutiae can move geopolitics. This logically leads us to 3 big questions we will examine. First, how did attribution settle on Libyan operatives? Second, counterfactually, what if the device had functioned later over the Atlantic? Third, is there definitive public evidence establishing the bomb's exact point of origin in the baggage chain?
So moving on to the first. How was the bombing attributed to Libyan operatives, specifically to Abd el-Basit al-Megrahi, when early suspicion had also fallen on other groups?
To elaborate, the investigative spine was circumstantial but cumulative. Forensics localized the blast to the forward hold and to a particular luggage container. Investigators identified fragments of a Toshiba radiocassette player congruent with a concealed IED, and Samsonite suitcase pieces. Crucially, they traced baby clothing to a Maltese shop, where shopkeeper Tony Gauci described the buyer, later identified as al-Megrahi. A tiny timer fragment, associated with MIBO devices traced to Libyan procurement, entered the evidentiary chain. Years of joint Scottish and U.S. inquiry culminated in indictments in 1991, a handover in 1999, and the 2001 Camp Zeist verdict. Megrahi convicted and Lamin Fima acquitted.
And the controversies. I'm curious about how the identification and the timer evidence have been questioned.
It's crucial to understand the fragility of certain links. Gauci's accounts varied over time about the buyer's appearance and the sale date, and he had seen a magazine linking Megrahi to the case before identifying him, a classic risk of identification bias. The Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission in 2007 concluded a miscarriage of justice may have occurred and referred the case back. Events later cut short the appeal process. Regarding the timer fragment, defense critics have pointed to chain of custody questions and discrepancies between early descriptions of circuit board layers and the item presented at trial. Official processes did not validate allegations of misconduct. Nonetheless, these objections remained live in public debate, especially as only one person was ever convicted for an operation that plausibly required several participants.
So, in summary, the legal attribution to Libya rested on a circumstantial lattice. Enough for a conviction at the time, but still argued over by researchers and families.
Speaking of alternative timelines, what if the bomb had detonated over the Atlantic? The most immediate effect would have been evidentiary scarcity. We observed that the land impact at Lockerbie yielded millions of fragments, timer parts, suitcase remnants, and identifiable clothing. Over deep water, recovery would likely have been fragmentary or impossible. Thus, attributive threads to a particular shop in Malta or to a specific timer family might never have emerged. The investigative narrative, and therefore the prosecutorial pathway, would have been far less determinate.
And what about diplomacy? Would sanctions and compensation negotiations with Libya have unfolded the same way?
Arguably not, or at least not on the observed timeline. UN sanctions and their easing were coupled to concrete steps: handovers of named suspects, and later, compensation linked to acceptance of state responsibility, framed through the employment of a convicted official. Without land-based forensics to narrow responsibility, we might have seen a prolonged, indeterminate attribution phase, with competing claims never resolved in court. Policymakers would likely have faced greater hurdles marshalling consensus, and families' advocacy might have met a more opaque target. In simpler terms, less evidence would have meant less leverage. Let's shift focus to the third question. Is there definitive public evidence for the bomb's point of origin in the baggage chain? The official UK-US position is the Malta to Frankfurt to Heathrow route. That is, a suitcase introduced in Malta, interlined through Frankfurt to the feeder flight, then transferred at Heathrow to the 747. This theory integrates the Maltese clothing and the timer fragment as cornerstones. By contrast, some relatives and researchers, notably Jim Swire, argue a Heathrow placement, pointing to vulnerabilities in Terminal 3 baggage handling and the possibility of introduction on site, which, if correct, would decouple the event from a Malta origin.
Can we say the question is settled? Or is it still open in the public record?
The courts rendered a conviction consistent with the Malta routing. Yet debates persist because, as the SCCRC noted, key elements bear uncertainty. Heathrow placement advocates focus on local access gaps. Official investigators emphasize the Maltese clothing trail and interline bag data. Complicating matters, the only person convicted maintained his innocence until death, and later U.S. charges against Abu Ajila Massoud, the alleged bomb maker, extend the Libyan nexus, while leaving the precise ingress point to be fully adjudicated. In conclusion, we lack a singular, universally accepted resolution in open sources. Further forensic transparency, if forthcoming in current proceedings, may clarify what remains contested.
What are the implications for aviation security today, whichever origin you believe?
Fundamentally, both narratives converge on the same prescriptions: robust control of unaccompanied baggage, an end-to-end chain of custody with timestamps, and auditable tamper-evident transfer points between airport zones and carriers. Add to this the lesson of the early December Helsinki warning: information must flow to where it can be acted upon. Otherwise, even the best policy degenerates into a paper artifact under a stack of other papers. Mathematically, the system is only as strong as its weakest node. To summarize, Pan Am 103 was a multi-legged transatlantic service whose destruction over Lockerbie killed 270 and transformed aviation security and diplomacy. We examined how attribution settled, legally, on Libyan operatives while noting evidentiary controversies. We considered the counterfactual of an ocean detonation and its likely chilling effect on evidence and diplomacy, and we outlined why the bomb's exact ingress point remains debated in public sources. For further study, compare with Air India Flight 182, another 747 bombing, and the on-ground destruction of Pan Am Flight 93 during the Dawson's Field hijackings. Similar threats, markedly different investigative contexts. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening, and keep asking rigorous questions.
Thank you, Professor. And thanks everyone for joining us. So, I guess that kind of sums it up.